well, what the hell does that mean, right?
Yeah.
Like, what is the right thing? And I think that this is where Toussaint was so great, because he got into so much detail on like what the right thing was and what ethics meant. And I think that if you're going to have an ethical stance, you have to be extremely explicit about every aspect of what that is.
It was either him or another example from the book where he said, look, if you're married, you can't have a
Yeah,
mistress.
that's Toussaint. You're right.
Because if we can't trust you to keep your word to your wife that you did before a pastor or a priest, before God or whatever, then how's the guy standing next to you going to trust what you tell him?
Yeah, no, exactly. That was so key, because one of the things he had to remember from our earlier conversation that he had to overcome was like the slow trust. So how do you reestablish that? Well, you go like, I'm not going to let you cheat on your wives.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, now in a military context, that's very unusual. I mean, even today, right? Like we have the whole thing. I won't name names, but they are, all in. But going from that to, okay, I'm going to hold you to this rigid standard. I'm going to kick you out. You can't be an officer in the Army. Why do that? And it's exactly as you said. It's like trust is paramount. Like that's the thing. And Toussaint famously said, I'd rather relinquish my command than break my word. Like I'm not gonna. And everything was like trust was the foundation of how he got out of the weakness of slave culture and into this super strong military culture that he built.
Are leaders like this very explicit in the why? Like, did he say you can't cheat on your wife and here's why, or did he just say you can't cheat on your wife and then he knew why but nobody else did?
Yeah, no. I think that the why is fundamental, and in almost any kind of cultural value. And I just give you a quick example that we have one here. So one of the really important things for us when we started the venture capital firm was we have to respect the entrepreneurial process and what it means, and respect the entrepreneur and how difficult that task is to build a company. But like everybody in venture capital says that.
Yeah.
But like nobody acts that way. They're like, oh yeah, I'm a half hour late to the meeting. I'm obviously more important than you. I don't respect you. Oh, I'm not going to do your deal. I'm not going to tell you. I'm just going to ghost you. Like, F off. I don't respect you. And so like the whole industry, kind of the protocol is very disrespectful to entrepreneurs, yet they all say that they're very respectful. So it's like this weird thing. And so I was really committed when we started to not doing that, because it used to drive me crazy as an entrepreneur. And so one of the things we put in place here was, if you're late to a meeting with an entrepreneur, the fine is $10 a minute. So you got to go to the bathroom, you're 5 minutes late, no problem, $50. And you're paying it right on the spot, and you're going to be embarrassed in front of everybody like it's like that.
Oh, wow.
And so you go, well, why would you do that, Ben? You're such an asshole. And, it may be true. But the key was the why, because the rule was so like shocking, people would ask, well, why I was doing like an important phone call. I had to go to the bathroom. Like, why are you charging me so much damn money to like go to work? Like I'm working, like I'm not at home. And the reason is because we're not going to waste a second of entrepreneur time ever. Like we're not going to do that, because that's why we're here. We have a respect for how hard it is to do what they're doing, and we're not going to waste their time. And like and I want to tell that story, I want people to ask me why, so that I can tell that story over and over and over again, because it's so important. And that's what builds the culture, is the why.
Yeah, that the why is what builds the culture versus just the rule, I think, is what a lot of people are missing when they do these offsites or whatever.
Right.
Because they go, oh, cool, we have this thing, and we're going to, a list of 10 core values, and we're going to have an artist like spray it on the break room wall, and then it's just literally decoration. That's it.
Yeah, no, it's exactly right. And well, and one of the things I have in the book is Tom Coughlin, with a similar shocking role, but with a different meaning, right? So, he was like, if you're on time, you're late.
Yeah.
And like he would fine people for being on time, and thousands of dollars in his case. And even the New York Times was like, this guy's just like an abusive coach. Like he's like, these players, they're calling us and they're complaining because he's abusing them. But you got into the why of it, and of course he won 2 Super Bowls, was because like we really care about the details of everything we do. So much so that like if you're on time, you're late. If you're not doing your job exactly right, then it's wrong. And that whole thing made them just a very, very highly precise operation, which in football turns out to be really important.
Yeah.
So, he created that culture that took them from like a really horrible team to a Super Bowl team.
You mentioned Uber before, and in the book, you actually say Uber is true to its core values, and it's kind of like, well, whoa, what do you mean? They got in trouble for allegedly stealing Weibo documents. I don't know if we're still using the allegedly word.
Well, I think Lewandowski actually got convicted for
Yeah, so they stole the Weibo documents, so I'll cross allegedly off my list. Hacking rivals in China, they were sort of like scamming rides in China and in the U.S., I think.
Yeah.
Tricking competition, and there's the Susan Fowler incident, which I believe is like a sexual harassment thing. And you said, hey, that's all culturally consistent. What do you mean by that?
Well, look, and I want to make sure I'm not misunderstood on this one. So Travis Kalanick was not a good, but a great CEO in almost every way. Like one of the best CEOs we've seen in Silicon Valley in many years. And beyond that, like he was really good at culture, like really good, not like a little good, really good. And if you read the Uber cultural values, they're super unique, they're very motivating, and they really adhered to it. But he had a bug in his code. Like if culture is a code, he had a bug, and that bug was really significant in that he had a giant emphasis on, I would say, competitiveness, ownership mentality, these kinds of things. And so what that meant was like, we're all about winning. And he had this thing he used to say, #winning. Like, we're going to win. And that's the most important thing. And then I'm going to give managers a tremendous amount of autonomy on how to do that. But he never said, and this is the thing that, was one of the keys to Sant, was he never made the ethics or the limits explicit. That was just left unsaid. And so the way people ended up interpreting it was, well, we can do whatever as long as we win. And if you look at every single incident that they had, it was almost every single one was driven by some competitive intention. This is how we're going to win. And like, for example, the hacking the competitor's app actually was done to them first by Didi in China.
Right, I remember.
Right, that. Like where that was okay, but because there was no like explicit instruction about whether that was okay or not, they just brought it back and did it here. And if you go through one by one from Susan Fowler to Lewandowski to whatever, it was always about winning. And with Lewandowski, remember, Google was kind of attacking Uber. They were a partner of Uber's, but then they were going to launch. Uber got word they're going to launch a ride-sharing thing, and so it was a competition, and it was about winning. But if you don't have the line, and everybody's using their own judgment on that, then that's where things got kind of wacky on them. And to me, it's tragic because, and I think, look, I would say, I'll bet Travis learned from that, and I'll bet that he'll be very successful in the future because he's a tremendously gifted, not only CEO, but he's tremendously gifted on culture. He just but it's very difficult, that little thing caused the whole thing to nearly unravel.
Right, so it's almost like the AI example where if you have the best paperclip making AI, then it's like if you just follow the rule to an extreme conclusion, now it's dismantling humans to make more paperclips or whatever.
Right, exactly.
So it's culture as a code that has unintended consequences potentially.
Yeah, no, and it often does. I mean, I think culture often has unintended consequences, and you don't want them to be fatal. I mean, that's a key.
Yeah.
And so you have to be really, really thoughtful about how you do them, and then you have to pay attention to it, and you have to change it when it's broken.
A few of the culture rules come from really unexpected places. Well, the slave revolt was unexpected for sure, but Shaka Senghor, who is this like prison gang leader, I guess, for lack of a better word, he was really somebody.
Although, hey, Shaka says we don't call them gangs in prison.
Oh, okay.
We call them squads, religious organizations.
So he's a prison squad, religious organization.
Well, he ran a squad called the Melanics.
Yeah. All right, so how did you come across this guy?
Yeah, it was the weirdest story. So I was actually interviewing Oprah Winfrey for she was having an event out here, and I was going to interview her for the launch of a show she had called Belief. but like I'm interviewing Oprah. That's like that's a scary task, right?
Yeah.
That's like giving Albert Einstein a pop quiz. So I was like, okay, in physics. And so I said, Oprah, like, can you give me a little lesson in interviewing before
Why
I
did she
interview
pick
you?
you if you go there and you're like, tell me 5 tips
Yeah.
on interviewing? What was the
Yeah, so it's funny. The first tip was, she goes, Ben, like, well, the first thing is don't like have a list of questions and keep thinking of try and memorize them, because
right?
then you're not going to ask the most important question, which is a follow-up question. I said, like, I actually know that already. I've done enough interviews. I got that part. However, like, what I really want to know is, like, how do you ask these super aggressive questions, and then rather than people being defensive, they just like burst into tears.
Right,
Like,
yeah.
these awesome interviews. And she goes, oh yeah, that one. And then, she got into this thing that you talked about earlier, which is, I start by asking them, what are their intentions? And then I tell them, like, I'm going to get you your intention, but you have to trust me. And I say, okay, so, and she goes, well, let me give you an example. Last week on my show, Super Soul Sunday, like, I met this guy, 19 years in prison, 7 years in solitary confinement, scary guy, dreadlocks, tattoos, big muscles. She's like, so I'm interviewing him. And I say to him, when did you get into crime? And he says, well, I hit the streets when I was 14 years old. And she goes, Ben, but I had read his book. And so I didn't think that was right. So I said to him, well, what about that time when your mom, when you came home with straight A's on your report card and your mom reacted by throwing a pot at your head? And Oprah says, well, he said, that didn't make me feel very good. And he kind of tightened up, folded his arms, and she goes, now, how did that really make you feel? And he said, it made me feel like there was nothing that I was ever going to do in life that mattered. And Oprah says, you hit the streets when you were 9. And we both started crying, she said. And I was like, oh my God, that's the greatest interview story I've ever heard in my life. So I run home, tell my wife. She's like, oh, that's a great story. And I didn't think anything of it. Next thing I know, my wife has friended him on Facebook.
Chocolate singer?
Yeah. And I'm like, what are you doing? I was like, this guy's 19 years. He's killed people. Like, he went to jail for like murder he did commit, like didn't commit. And so like, that was great. And then she, like, next thing, she invites him over for dinner. And so I'm like, no, like, don't have him at the house. Like, let's have it at a restaurant down the street so we can get out of there in case it gets crazy. But, we have dinner with him. And the craziest thing about it was, I'm always talking to CEOs and I'm always trying to learn things. And I'm talking to him, and he is like probably the most advanced CEO that I've talked to since Andy Grove passed away. Like, it's like that. And then we'd listen to the same kind of music and whatnot. So we ended up talking for like 7 hours that night. And we became friends. And then, in learning his story and learning how he had to deal with prison culture and how he had to build the culture of the organization, I just thought, wow, like, that is so interesting for the book, because the guys he has, like in Silicon Valley, like, people come with some, like, a lot of, like, cultural elements, like things that you would want, things that they've been trained on, things. The guys he got in prison, like, ground zero, like, they were in prison because they came from like really psychotic cultures. And so he could use almost nothing that they came with. So how do you build a culture from first principles? And I'd say that's probably my favorite chapter in the book for that reason, because it's just, you read it and you go, oh my God, like, how do you even function in this environment, let alone create a culture, realize it's screwed up, and then change it and advance it. And of course, he does all these things.
Yeah, I thought that this part of the book was worth the price of admission for the book, period. Like, if it was just that chapter, I thought it was incredible. One of the things from the book, from that chapter, you have to constantly examine and reshape your culture, otherwise it won't be your culture at all. That can't be any more true than in prison.
Yes,
right?
Absolutely. Well, right, and his first day in prison kind of shows that, in that, he comes out of quarantine, and like quarantine, there's like whatever, 6 guys with him, And they come out, and their first day, like in the rec hall, one prisoner walks up to another one with a shank, stabs him in the neck. Prisoner bleeds to death. Guy throws his shank in the garbage, goes to the chow hall, and like has a sandwich.
Oh God.
And Shaka says to me, he's like, I was like, well, like, what did you think when you said that? Well, he said, the first thing I thought is like, can I do that? Because like, that's what you need to do to succeed here. Can I do that? And I was like, well, you had killed a guy. So like, of course you could do that. He's like, no. He's like, what I did was like, I'm in a drug deal. The guy jumps out of the car when he's not supposed to, like, and comes at me. I've got a gun in my pocket. I react and like I shoot him. Like it was just a reaction. This guy took a 2-liter bottle, filed it into a weapon, decides whether he's going to stab the guy in the stomach or stab him in the neck, wound him or kill him, decides he's going to kill him, walks up to him, kills him, then throws the thing in the trash, keeps it moving to the chow hall, and has a sandwich.
Yeah.
He's like, I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
So I had to ask myself that question, and I was like, wow, that is like a very intense form of, new employee cultural orientation, right?
Yeah.
And of course, that's going on in every company. Like you go into a company and you watch how the people who are succeeding behave, and whatever they're doing, that's what you're going to do. Like that becomes the culture. So like if you don't keep an eye on that,
Yeah.
if you're not adjusting it, like you get this super violent prison culture that we have in the United States.
Yeah. And if you walk into a company and someone gets stabbed in the neck with a shiv, get another job.
Yeah. Well, or you better like get your courage up. Yeah, exactly.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. These guys, the Millennics, this squad that he was controlling, no drinking, work out every day. Everyone had to fight for all the other guys. Yeah. There were a few other rules, but those are the main ones, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and he did a lot of work. I mean, he trained them. He would study philosophy and like train them in philosophy. Like, and a lot of that was to bond. Like they had a unique, common knowledge that defined them, and it was a like super powerful force in creating a culture. A lot of business leaders do that, where they say have their management team like all read the same book and so forth. But it was that kind of thing. But he didn't just say read this book. He was like, okay, then we're going to have a training session on it. And so a lot of his guys couldn't read, so.
Oh yeah, I didn't think about that. So someone had to read to them and explain to them.
Yeah, no, right, exactly.
What it was. Wow. Well, nothing like two white geeks talking about prison culture out here in Silicon Valley, right?
No doubt.
Yeah, I figured. Everything is being disrupted right now. Like, but disruption's a buzzword. It's not even exciting anymore for a lot of us. What are some areas that you think that are maybe top of mind that you think are ripe for this? Like, where is there some blue ocean? There's no forerunner that's yet emerged.
Well, I think that the big categories of the economy that are ripe for disruption are financial services, which I think is the one that's happening at the fastest rate, and this goes, everything from all kinds of banking services, foreign currency exchange, real estate services. Anything in those categories is both pretty old, and then technology hasn't been applied in a serious way. I mean, like even, it's funny, my Gmail account is far more secure than my bank account.
That's sad.
Yeah,
and
no, it's
scary.
It's bananas. But that is the state of the art, or the state of those industries. And a lot of it is, regulatory capture, and they've got, they've been able to be slow and lazy on technology because there are no new banks, and so that kind of helped it. You have to be too big to fail. That was a big result from Dodd-Frank. So that's a big area. Another is kind of healthcare and medicine. Everything from diagnostics to drugs to just healthcare in general. How it gets billed, how it gets allocated is massively, like just insanely inefficient and weird. And we're just now really being able to apply computer science techniques to biology, because we now have an informational model of biology, not just a chemical model, but an informational model. And so you can start applying AI and these things to drug discovery and medical diagnosis. And it's been like amazing, the results that people are starting to get. So I think healthcare and medicine is probably number two. And the one of the most frustratingly tough nuts to crack, but I think is coming, is education, where I mean, we still teach like we're getting people ready for the Industrial Revolution, and including the bell, right? Like that was like the factory bell,
I didn't
ding,
even
ding,
think
ding,
about
ding.
that.
Got to go to the next class. So bananas. But like I think change is coming there too.
I think a lot about that now because I have a 2-month-old baby, and people go, "Oh, are you going to send him to a public school or a private school?" And then you read these horrifying articles about public schools, and then you read these horrifying articles about private schools, and how it's like 50 grand a year, and you can't get in unless you're.
Yeah. Well, it's all corrupt, right?
Yeah.
You have to bribe the guys, or have somebody make a giant donation on your behalf.
Yeah.
Or whatever. Sure.
And then your kid goes there, and all the other kids are horrible because their parents are. Are there any industries that you think are immune to full software solutions? I mean, like retail. Are we all going to shop online from home, or is there something human about the shopping experience you think will always allow for brick and mortar?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just going to change. I mean, I think that these gigantic department stores that have pants in like 57 sizes. Like it doesn't make any sense anymore, right? Like you may have one pair in each size to try on or whatever, or a tailor, or like they just measure you. And you have one of each item and you can look at it and and they can maybe virtually show how it looks on you or whatever. You don't even have to get in the pants. And you don't have to worry about if like somebody before you didn't wear underwear or something like that, which you always is like whatever. So I think so. I think there will be definitely live shopping and all that kind of thing. Just like I think restaurants will persist despite the fact that there will be lots of things like virtual kitchens and all these kinds of things. But they're going to be different, right? The last set of retail was built for a completely different environment. So I think that everything going forward is going to assume that you have a supercomputer in your pocket and it's connected to the cloud, and there's a mass amount of information on everything from like materials to pricing and this and that and the other. But I don't think it's going to go away. I mean, like human interaction is a wonderful thing, and I think most people want it. Like some people don't. Like some people don't.
A lot of people in Silicon Valley could live without it.
Yeah, there are certainly a few here.
You've said that good ideas look like bad ideas at the time. What do you mean by that? And how do we know which is which if everything looks like a bad idea?
Yeah, yes. So, well, I mean, innovative ideas, the problem with innovative ideas is that they do look like bad ideas at the time. And that's kind of what, right? If an idea is a breakthrough, that means that people can't see it. And so that, by definition, kind of makes it look like maybe it's not a great idea, when it happens. But of course, bad ideas also look like bad ideas. So it's tricky to figure out which is which. The way we tend to distinguish is, does the entrepreneur have a secret that they've earned? So do they know something about the world that nobody else knows, or almost nobody else knows? And then did they discover it through some process of hard work? And that's generally where innovative ideas come from. So, for example, Brian Chesky at Airbnb, like if you heard that idea in the beginning, I'm going to blow up an air mattress, stick it in my apartment and rent it out, like you'd go, oh, that's obviously a bad idea.
Yeah.
I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that? People renting an air mattress in your apartment, that's going to be a catastrophe.
And originally, weren't they supposed to eat with us too? It was like we were going to feed them the breakfast part.
Yeah, well, the breakfast is a little more loose. But when you go through it, well, why'd you come up with that idea? Well, it turns out he and his roommates wanted to go to the design conference that was in San Francisco. They didn't have the money to buy the tickets, but they knew that so many people were coming in for the conference that there weren't enough hotel rooms. So they said, well, like, why don't we rent out space in our room and then we can get tickets? And it turned out that like 500 people called to rent that air mattress. And so he had a secret about demand for this particular type of service. And then he furthered that secret by kind of researching hotels. And it turns out hotels have only been around for like 100 years or so. And before that, there were inns and bed and breakfasts. Now, the problem that hotels at like Hyatt and Hilton solved was that you didn't know the quality. Like it could be pretty weird. You go into some small town and there's an inn and you don't know what the hell's in there. but they observed, Joe and Nate and Brian, they observed that with the internet, like you could rate every like room, air mattress, whatever, to a very fine grain of quality, more so than even like the Pritzkers could do at the Hyatt. And so, those two things combined made like a powerful secret, big enough off of which to build like a really gigantic company. And so that's a lot what we're looking for.
I know we have to close in a little bit, so I wanted to ask about your partnership with Mark. You said he upsets me almost every day by finding something wrong with my thinking.
Yeah.
So it's partnerships have to be provoking enough to be productive, I think, is the way that you phrase it in the book. So if it's too provoking, you can't get anything done. And if it's too little, there's just no passion to get motivated.
Yeah, like if I'm not learning from him and he's not learning from me, then what's the value of the partnership? And the only way that, and like when you're old, anything you learn makes you angry. Because you wish, because you kind of thought you should already know it. And so I think that in a good working relationship, there's a lot of conflict. And, but you have enough trust where you can overcome the conflict. And, he and I have been working together now 24 years. So I think, but it still gets me mad. Like there are days when I'm just like, I'm going home. I can't take him anymore.
Who decides how the names go? For my last flimsy question, who decides who the names go in a partnership? Like, why isn't it Horowitz Andreessen?
So we started. We had an angel fund before Andreessen Horowitz called Horowitz Andreessen.
Oh man,
which has a little bit of ring to it.
Yeah.
But I actually insisted that he wanted. It was funny. He wanted Horowitz Andreessen. I wanted Andreessen Horowitz once we created the firm. And the reason I wanted Andreessen Horowitz was. When we started, he was like not a little more famous. He's still more famous than me, but he was a lot more famous than I was. And the biggest question we had when we were raising money is like, are you guys going to actually stick around and do this? Or are you going to move on to your next venture? And so I was like, well, we have to put our name on the firm so people will believe that. And like your name is the bigger question. Nobody really cares if I go. As long as it's Andreessen Capital, it'd be fine. So we put his name first. And then the other dividend was the Andreessen Horowitz is impossible to spell, so it can't be your URL. So I came up with this idea that like we would just do what we used to do when we were engineers in the 90s about internationalization. We called it I-18N. And so this was A16Z, and A to Z is just way better than H to whatever. And
H to A, it's not backwards, we promise. Yeah, well, this has been excellent. I do wonder why you dedicated the book to people coming out of prison. I thought that was really interesting. I do some work with prisons, and I'm actually going for my 40th birthday to a prison.
Well, it comes to kind of the last line in the Shaka chapter, which is, I say like, so who is Shaka Senghor? Is he, like a super thug from, gang leading, like murder from prison, or is he like an upstanding citizen, New York Times bestselling author, super creative guy? And the answer is both, right? What you do is who you are. And I think that we've come as a culture to this idea that you can't be redeemed, that if you do anything, if you have a tweet from 5 years ago, that like you can't ever change and all this, BS. And so I think it starts with people in prison who absolutely can change. And, what you do is who you are, not like what you did when you were 17 years old to get yourself into prison. And so I really wanted to kind of reach out to people on the inside and let them know that at least, for me, I could see that. And, when we do this book tour, we're definitely going to, we already have a few prisons on the list that we're going to go visit.
Really?
And that's really what it's about. It's about like, if you change your culture, you change yourself, you change who you are, and that's as an individual or as an organization.
Well, thank you very much.
Yeah, that was great. That was fun. Thank you,
Thanks.
Fred.
Yeah, this is a lot of fun.